The 2010 Atlanta Press Club debates, brought to you live from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Tonight, the Democratic race for the 13th Congressional District.
Good evening. I'm Amanda Davis, news anchor for WAGA Fox 5 Atlanta, and welcome to our 2010 primary election campaign debates, originating from the studios of GPB. Tonight's debate is organized by the Atlanta Press Club. Now, let's meet the Democratic candidates facing each other in Georgia's 13th Congressional District primary election. They are, in alphabetical order, Michael Frisbee. He's a web content and graphics consultant. And Mike Murphy is a regional manager and consultant. David Scott, the incumbent, is the CEO and owner of Danemark Advertising Agency. Of course, the congressman declined our invitation to participate in this debate, and he is represented by the podium that you see there. Here is the format for tonight's debate. In the first round, each candidate will answer a question from one of our three panelists. In the second round, the candidates will ask a question of each other. Also, the candidates will have time for rebuttal in this round. And in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning the candidates. Finally, each candidate will have 30 seconds to make a closing statement. And before we get started, well, let's meet our three panelists, selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we have Tom Baxter, editor and reporter for Southern Political Report. Then Jeremy Redmond, staff reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And our third panelist is Harry Weber, who is a reporter for the Associated Press. Now, let's get started with our debate. In the first round, each candidate will be asked a question by one of our panelists. The candidates have 30 seconds to answer each question, and as moderator, I will determine if a rebuttal is necessary. Well, by random selection, Michael Frisbee gets our first question from Tom Baxter.
Mr. Frisbee, on your website you say that you've been a conservative constitutional activist for a decade, and you seem to make no pretense of being a Democrat in modern terms in anything other than name. Can you talk about what made you a conservative constitutional activist and what was your politics before that?
Well, I grew up in a Republican home. In fact, I worked on a number of campaigns volunteering from the age of 16 in Republican campaigns in Pennsylvania. My divergence from the Republican Party started with Ross Perot in '92. I worked in his campaign to help put him on the ballot. I finally left when I started realizing both parties really wasn't meeting what we needed in Congress and was violating the Constitution. So that's why I started studying and working hard to bring that to light.
Mr. Frisbee, thank you. Our second question, Jeremy Redmond, you may ask a question to Mike Murphy.
Good evening, Mr. Murphy.
Good evening.
Tell me, when you decided to run for this seat, you previously ran as a Republican for Congress in Massachusetts unsuccessfully in 1994, and you also ran Republican Deborah Honeycutt's unsuccessful campaign against Representative Scott in 2008. Why did you decide to run as a Democrat in this race, and why should voters take you seriously as a Democrat given your Republican background?
Thank you for that question. I have been very much involved in the 13th district, and I would say that any suggestion that maybe that I had switched parties for any other ulterior motive other than the people would certainly not be accurate. It's the people that I think are the ultimate goal, and certainly I realize that the Republican Party is really the party of the classes and not the masses.
Mr. Murphy, thank you very much. And that concludes round one. It is now time for our candidates to ask a question of one another. You have 15 seconds for the question, 30 seconds to respond, and then 15 seconds for a rebuttal. By random selection, Mike Murphy, you have to ask the first question.
Thank you. Mr. Frisbee, I was wondering if you might could share with us what you consider to be the three major needs of the 13th district.
Well, I see that one of the most important things we have going that needs to be addressed is jobs. We definitely need to bring jobs to this area. People are really hurting. Outside of that, I'd say education needs to be addressed. And there's been a lot of problems in this state, and particularly in Clayton County, that we want to really pick up. And the other part is transportation. We have a serious transportation issue in the state, and I want to do what I can as a congressman to help bring that about.
All right, Mr. Frisbee, thank you very much. And now it's your turn to ask a question of Mr. Murphy.
Mr. Murphy, I understand from your website that you agree that we need better access for health care and such. How do you feel you should proceed as a congressman to either support or work towards more other solutions other than what we have currently?
Well, thank you for that question. The way that I would support moving is, first of all, having a meeting throughout the district with the people. And God's blessed me with a good pair of ears, so I would listen. And I would certainly put forward what I think are the real concerns, where we are today, and listen to what they have to say. And I would certainly act accordingly in terms of representing them in Washington.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. And that concludes our second round of questioning. For those who may be joining our program now in progress, this is the debate among the candidates for Georgia's 13th Congressional District in the Democratic primary. For our third round, we return to our panel of journalists who will now ask questions of the candidate of his choice. And those candidates will be allowed 30 seconds to respond. And as moderator, I again will determine if an opposing candidate will be given 15 seconds for rebuttal. So let's begin this round with a question from Harry Weber.
Mr. Murphy, there's been a great deal of debate about the Obama administration's imposition of a ban on offshore drilling, and as you may know, the courts have blocked that. Where do you stand on offshore drilling? And more importantly, do you think that the Congress and the current administration have done a good or bad job on dealing with the oil spill in the Gulf? And what would you do differently, if anything?
Well, thank you for that question. First of all, I support offshore drilling. I would not, as much of a tragedy in the fact that our earth is bleeding, as much as a tragedy that is, I certainly would not let that stop us from doing what we must do. And certainly, I think the administration has certainly could have reacted much quicker, brought in more resources to try to get the issue addressed. And I would certainly say, if I were in Washington, I would move to make sure that we do what actions are necessary to avoid a recurrence like this in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I think that's such an important question. Mr. Frisbee, would you like to answer as well?
Yeah, I agree. We need to keep with the offshore drilling. We need to open up safer areas, such as the shallow waters, where we have the capability of addressing safety issues in a more common sense manner. Unfortunately, a lot of people have solutions out there that could have been brought to the forefront almost immediately, but they were ignored. And I think as a congressman, I'd want to bring to the forefront those solutions and put them into effect.
All right, candidates, thank you. And now Tom Baxter will ask a question.
Mr. Frisbee, do you support the Atlanta to Lovejoy rail concept? And if elected, would you be as active in support of the idea as Congressman Scott has been?
Well, I would like to see in that regards more of the private industry involved rather than federal funding, because that federal funding comes right out of the taxpayer's pocket. With regards to state mandates and projects, I think private industry has better solutions. I would help to work towards better solutions in getting that pushed in this state, because I think that would be a big help for our transportation issues here.
So you would be for it if it were a private enterprise, but not if it were publicly funded?
Mr. Murphy, you have any comment on that?
Yes, I would simply say that I am supportive of transportation. I certainly would have some concerns about rail, because my examination of rail transportation in most areas does not pay for itself. But I certainly would support improving the transportation system in Clayton County particularly.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Jeremy Redmond, it's your turn now to ask a question of our candidates.
Yes, Mr. Frisbee, you've said that you would seek to abolish the federal education department if you were elected. Please tell us why.
Well, one of the things that we've found over the last 30 years is a steady decrease in quality of education ever since the Department of Education has come to be. A lot of that money that's being put into education is being put more towards the over-bloated bureaucracy that's in the federal government. By taking out the Department of Education, we let the states take back control, and let the local boards work with the states to have better education.
Mr. Baxter, you have another question?
Mr. Murphy, do you agree with the portion of the new banking bill that requires banks, and I know there were some modifications on this late last night, but the bill still requires banks to spin off most of their derivative operations. Do you agree with that? And if you don't agree with it, what are your thoughts on regulating a practice that really has been central to the financial meltdown?
Well, I do support the legislation that was passed. I think that derivatives and other such speculative ventures is what kind of led to this crisis that we had. And I feel bankers need to stick to banking. And my experience has always been they've been conservative, perhaps too much at times, but certainly I don't support speculative type of investments.
And now another question from the Associated Press. Mr. Harry Weber.
Mr. Frisbee, many pundits would say that Congressman David Scott, who isn't here tonight, is a lock to win this race. Maybe that's why he didn't bother to come tonight. Do you think you have what it takes to win? Perhaps a surprise? I mean, why are you running, and what do you think your chances are in the election?
Well, I think there's a real unrest in this district. I think Mr. Scott has shown that he's really not about the people here, but about the party and about progressive, tendencies that really don't meet what the people want. The fact that he's not here shows his arrogance to what we feel here in this district. I think what we really need is someone that can bring back a constitutional common sense in our bills. And I do think I have what it takes. I think there's a lot of people that will side on me in that.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Jeremy Redmond, question?
Mr. Frisbee, I'd like to hear your position on the national health care reform legislation. I think you've said that you would seek to repeal it if elected.
That's correct. I would join with other congressmen to not just repeal it, but to replace it. There are ways to bring about reform, and those reforms do not have to be power grabs. Right now, what we have has nothing to do with reducing costs. There's a lot of ways. In fact, there's a co-op, 19 of them around this state, and not this state, but around the country, that are cooperatives of doctors where you pay a member fee, and then after your first visit, they set a monthly fee. That's all you pay. No insurance needed.
All right.
And
thank you, Mr.
It's a great
Frisbee.
fee and a great program.
All right, Mr. Baxter.
Mr. Murphy, the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute warned today that with the defeat of the 6-month Medicaid extension in the Senate Thursday, Georgia is going to begin the upcoming fiscal year with a deficit of more than $1 billion. Would you have voted for the extension along with the extension of jobless benefits? And if not, what would you do to help the state through what is going to be a very difficult budgetary period?
Thank you for that question. I certainly would have, I believe, taken a much closer look at the alternatives. I believe, for example, we've got to find an alternative to unemployment insurance that involves the government. I would in favor of the system that Chile has, whereby the employee puts in, has a savings account, and if it's needed for unemployment, they use it. If not, it goes on towards, it says, retirement savings. It
All right,
takes the
Mr.
government
Murphy,
out
thank
of that
you.
loop.
Thank you for your answer. And our final question for this round will come from Mr. Harry Weber.
Mr. Frisbee, you talked about transportation earlier as something that you would focus on if you were elected to Congress. What specifically would you do as a congressman in Georgia? I think you're right. There are a number of transportation issues. Rail is a big issue, a big problem in Georgia. The lack of it outside in the suburbs. What exactly would you do?
Well, what I would look to do is to work with the private industry, different businesses that would benefit from a better transportation system in the state, have them become partners in seeing something brought to the area that not just involved trains, but buses and other modes that would allow the people to get to the work that is available, just can't get to. Yes, that we do have a greater need for jobs, but we also have a need to get people to jobs that are available.
I'm sorry, we're out of time. Candidates, thank you very much. We have no more time for additional questions of each of the Democratic candidates in the primary. for the 13th Congressional District. We'll now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Mike Murphy was randomly selected to make the first closing statement.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for sponsoring this forum. To the residents and the voters of the 13th District, I want to be your congressman. I want to represent you in Washington. You will see me, you will know me, and you will be able to reach me. I ask on Tuesday, July the 20th, you join me in selecting a Democrat ballot and mark that second box for Mike Murphy.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy. And now Michael Frisbee will give his closing statement.
I, too, would like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for inviting us here for this. I think it's important for the people to hear our candidates. Unfortunately, they can't hear all of us. One of the things I want to do as a congressman is I want to bring the different groups in this district together. There's a lot of disparity. And as a congressman, I would bring together a volunteer council representing all the different towns to listen to them on a monthly basis as to what they feel the problems and concerns are and help to reach
Thank you,
a
Mr.
solution
Frisbee.
for them.
And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the primary elections will be held on Tuesday, July 20th. And our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. Stay with us. We'll have another debate coming up at 7:20.
The Atlanta Press Club debate series is made possible by a donation from the late Tom Watson Brown.